All right, here we go. Rod, you made it in. Appreciate you coming in. First time we met. And I just asked you, so I got to get this right. So it's Rod Schulhauser.
Right on.
Did it. So I'm going to guess, but I mean, it's got to be European. I'm going to guess German?
German, Hungarian. Yeah, you got the right neck of the woods.
Yeah, somewhere over there. So that means if you're German, Hungarian, that means you grew up in the Waterloo region.
No. Yeah, I was a Western boy, Saskatoon, but then
really
pretty well since like 4 years old, I've been here in the Burlington kind of area.
So were you like on a farm when you were a kid?
I have no idea. I left there when I was like 5 weeks old. Can't remember.
Oh, that young.
Yeah.
That young. Okay.
Yeah. Memories started when we were in London. We were like London, Windsor, Barrie. Then
yeah, I was going to be very jealous because I don't know. As time goes by, for some reason, I look at farms and they become more and more appealing to me. And outside of I don't think I want to drive a half hour into town to go to the grocery store. I don't think I'm at that point yet. But just being close with more nature, more land around, animals, quality food. If you control your own food supply, all that stuff becomes more interesting. I don't know if maybe it's a midlife crisis. I have no idea.
No, I think it's normal. Like I just tried that direct from farm, meats.
Yeah.
Night and day difference.
Yeah,
you get into that kind of stuff. So I hear you.
I should show you a picture of my freezer. My wife will joke. So I just ordered a half a cow and filled up the freezer at home, and I get so happy on those days when I bring it all home. And it's like a little Tetris game. That's my age now. Like showing because of Tetris. I don't think people play that anymore. But it's this little kind of I make it all fit and. When I get it all in, I take a picture of it and I show people afterwards. I'm like, hey, you want to see my freezer? And it's like just stacked with meat. My wife laughs. She's like, you show people pictures of your freezer more than you show people pictures of your kids. I'm like, I don't know. Priorities, I guess. I don't know.
There you go. It's a hobby.
So Rod, our paths crossed through Derek, who was on here a couple weeks ago. But you guys kind of focused on, so we were talking more about apartments and stuff, and you guys are focusing on a little bit of a different aspect of the kind of housing supply world, or shelter or affordability, I guess a little bit of everything. Maybe just kind of give everyone an insight into kind of where you guys are headed with this and what road you're headed down.
Yeah, because Derek and I were apartment centric, and we still are. Our primary business is all about working with private developers of apartments. But a couple of years ago, we realized that this housing crisis was much too big to just ignore it. It's not part of real estate. It's not part of commercial. It's not part of apartments. But it is, because rental is 50% of the equation. And so we started this mental process of saying, hey, let's just write a book. We know how to write books. We can do it like the back of our hand. And why don't we write a book for our kids and our staff? Because we got a lot of, 20-somethings, early 30-something employees, and our children are roughly the same age as well, home buying age or just having bought homes. And, gone are the days when, Derek and I could compare notes. Our homes were neighbors, was a couple times our income. And I can relate to my son who bought his first home about a year and a half ago out in the Stony Creek area. And it was approaching 15 times his income. And that's the problem, right? And so we thought, how do we help them? Other than giving them cash, how do we help that generation realize the dream of home ownership that has otherwise been squashed for the vast majority of them? And so that's where the book came from. The book called The Self-Funding House was only going to be a message for the younger generations, for them to think differently, because home ownership is possible if you think differently about home ownership.
Mm-hmm. I remember when we spoke, I meant to mention this when I spoke to Derek, and I think I mentioned it to you. Growing up in Mississauga, there was those semi-detached properties, and they were like it was like a raised bungalow essentially, because the driveway was on the lower level, and there was a doorway in there. The garage was in there, and the door was right beside it. You can go in there to the basement, or there were steps up the side to a second level, and you could have, and then that would be a living area as well. And I remember that was almost my first home, because I looked at that type of property and I said, it just makes sense. Like I could live on the upstairs or downstairs and rent out the other level. And I was running some numbers that way, if that made sense. That was before I bought my first condo as an investment in Mississauga. It was going to be my first investment. And some people had started doing it at that time, but it just wasn't spoken about.
It's not common.
Yeah.
And that's the mindset shift we were after in the book, because you and I get it. We're in the real estate business. And so when you say duplex, you say basement apartment, you and I think wealth creation. We think of the right thing to do. But if I reel back the years, like think about when you and I were teenagers, let's say. If I was having a conversation over the road hockey game with one of my buddies and you talked about I live in a basement apartment or I live in a duplex, wealth does not come to mind. You think of, oh, that's lower class living, or that's for the younger generation. That's the marketplace mindset. But today the reality is, and the whole lesson of our book is, the thinking differently about home ownership is, think of that home as a business by becoming a landlord. Now, all the people who are real estate investors, they already get that. They get the math, they get the concept. But I would submit that most of our kids, most of Canadians aren't thinking about home ownership that way first. But the reality is, if they just think about that, they would be blown away by simple math if they suddenly figured out what a rental income for downstairs or a rental income from upstairs means from home ownership. And you could give one sentence, Nick. You could tell them, hey, with the average house in Canada, your household income approaches $200,000 to afford that house with 20% down, all these kinds of things. But you rent upstairs, live downstairs, and maybe you get $2,500, $2,800 a month in rent. Most younger generations would think there's no way this is true when you tell them your household income goes down to about $60,000. Now, that's not for mortgage qualifications, stress testing, and all that. We're just talking about that 1/3 of your income going to, your shelter type of an equation. And the reaction is, no, I don't believe that. And that's exactly the mind jolt we're trying to give the younger generation to cause them, if that's remotely true, maybe home ownership is possible.
When did you guys release this book? I actually didn't ask you that.
About a year and a half ago.
Okay.
So, yeah, a year ago, March. And
so it was a few months. I forget when you guys sent. There was a nice, great package sent out. You're the marketing guy, so I don't know if you put that together or not. But obviously, it gets people's attention when you send them a package like that. It gets people's attention. And around the same time, I don't know if it was before or after. Around the same time is when I think in one of Benjamin Tall's reports, I remember reading that. I guess it was afterwards because I'm like, oh, self-funding house. I'm like, oh, that's funny. That's the book. That's, I didn't know you at the time, so I knew Derek. So I associated with Derek. I'm like, oh, that's the book that Derek sent over. So it's interesting. So it's been like, there's some visibility there. Are you finding people receptive to that message, or because it's kind of, not that we're brainwashed, but there's programming for years that you're trying to reverse. So there's some challenges there.
Yeah. Well, and like Benjamin Tall, he's a chief economist of CIBC, and literally one of his catch-all sentences was, regardless of whether you want a renter in your basement or not, if it means a house or not a house, your options are limited. There are no other limits. Like, basically the way I look at it, Nick, there's two ways you can afford a house. You magically figure out how the builder can build that house cheaper. How's that going to happen? Land is what it is. Construction costs are what they are. Or you increase the income of the buyer. Those are the only two vehicles. And so we go at it programmatically with builders to say there are ways to increase the income of the home buyer. And with our relationships, we've got it to the point where that rental income can count towards mortgage qualification. And
then with the builders you guys are working with on this, you're talking about like an accessory dwelling unit in the basement or on a secondary level somewhere, or is it specifically garden suites, laneway housing?
No, it's primarily the basement, just because if you think of, when we wrote the book, and we even brought out book number 2, thinking that the lion's share of this message would mean a younger couple buying an existing home and renovating, the classic investment strategy that you would think would be normal. But one of our largest clients in the apartment space also has a home building division. And, if you think back a couple of years ago when interest rates first did their thing, Derek actually happened to be having dinner with him, and, he was lamenting about how new home sales came to a screeching halt. Derek says, hey, next year, Rod and I are releasing this new book. By the end of that dinner, they had decided, why don't we try the concept in new construction? And that's when our book idea of just doing the right thing and getting the message out there turned into a business. Because Derek and I understand construction. We understand development. We understand real estate. We don't understand renovation. We're not renovation guys. We're not, we're commercial guys. We're not the residential guys. And so when our whole focus shifted to new construction, that's when the basement became the right way to do it. Because putting in that basement suite at the time of construction, that's a $75,000 tab versus, double that plus for renovation, right? Yeah,
and you can plan it accordingly too, with ceiling height and just the layout of the basement to get maximum use out of it as well, right?
Yeah, and there's so much that's changed. As we were writing the book, we were already envisioning, okay, what are the younger people gonna going to have as objections and barriers. And Bill 23 came out as we were writing the book. So that was our first barrier. How do we get municipalities, the not in my backyard, all these kind of zoning horror stories that have been around for decades upon decades. Well, that disappeared with Bill 23. And then we had to focus in on just process, because home builders, this isn't intuitive to them.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like something like Bill 23, like the government looking at essentially, and the way I look at it is it's the government looking at the private sector, basically throwing up their hands and saying, look, we're not going to fix this. It's like, after decades and decades of them talking about fixing it, they're not fixing it with any supply problems or supply creation or affordable housing. So now they've tried to just change laws to make it more attractive for the private individual to be able to fulfill that gap in the market, which is, both more housing units and, quote unquote affordable, whatever that constitutes today, because all the numbers are so seem so extreme to everyone, whatever affordable is considered. But is like, do you look at it like that?
I think I do. I think my spin off of what you just said, Nick, is that Bill 23 empowers the existing home buyer, right, to do something, if they don't want to downsize or whatever, or they're upside down in their mortgage or whatever it may be. Now they have a tool to go about doing it quicker than before and less painful than before when you go through all the permitting and zoning and all of those aspects. But I think the other thing, whether they knew it at the time or not, but the other smart thing that comes out of this is the ability to create new affordability solutions for both ownership and affordability of rentals. Because if you think about it, every time there's a basement suite, whether the homeowner lives downstairs and rents upstairs or vice versa, those rents are probably approaching half of market rents. It's not that everybody wants to go live in a basement, but you think about the new grad, the young guy, young gal leaving home for a job or whatever. We need those rental spaces. How many mums and dads have got a son or a daughter living still in the house at the age of 20-something? So there's great ways to purpose that and reclaim it as that young couple grows their family. They can reclaim that suite as they raise their kids. Full circle comes around when they're empty nesters. They don't have to, repurpose their home or sell their home and downsize because of finances. They actually can have income and maintain and age in place. So there's many other things that I don't think the government was thinking of when they did this.
Yeah.
That really steamrolled the landscape for one thing, and that is to change the marketplace thinking when it comes to homes.
Yeah, because there is a stigma associated with, I guess if someone's living on a not a basement suite, the upper level of a home, it doesn't really exist in the same way, but there's a stigma associated with basement apartment, right? Small windows, dark, moldy, like damp down there. And I think that exists from a lot of construction that was done in the past. But now some of the basement suites that are being done, either on a renovation standpoint when they're brand new, if they're done properly, they're quite nice.
They are.
And from a new construction standpoint, you're starting to see ones with a little bit higher ceilings. So right, your higher ceilings, decent sized windows, right, as much as above grade as possible. So you're getting like a decent amount of natural light in there. It's really changed the way people can look at them. So it's not, if people toured some of these, the ones that have been familiar with basement apartments in the past, they would almost be blown away, because some of the new ones I've seen, I'm like, that's beautiful. I've seen basement kitchens with a nice island waterfall countertop in the island, and I'm just like, what the heck is this? I mean, I'd live here with my family, no problem.
It's amazing what happens when you have an 8-foot, a 9-foot ceiling in the basement, and you've got 4-foot windows, and no longer you're actually worried about egress because the windows are so big.
Yeah, you can jump out of it if you need to.
And that's why it's very enticing for young couples and young individuals to actually, if they understand the math and they understand the numbers, why not live downstairs, increase that equity, double the rent upstairs versus downstairs. And it's amazing how that journey, I mean, you guys are rock stars literally of teaching people what it is to have financial common sense when it comes to real estate. Well, creating equity is a fabulous way to get ahead. I mean, that lesson for mom and dad doesn't change.
Yeah.
Get in the market as quickly as you can. The challenge is these huge barriers came up over the last, 8 to 10 years.
So then how do you get that message in front? So the huge barriers, stop there for a second. You're talking about just the price increases that have
financial barriers in that case. Which
makes it difficult. But those huge barriers are partly removed by adding the income stream from the property, because with that income stream, you know, qualification is easier from the mortgage to carrying cost standpoint, but you still need the down payment.
Yeah. And that's what we're actually later this month launching this new program, because with our existing projects to date.
What's it called? The mom and dad down payment program?
Get out of my house program.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be. You're right on. You're the marketer now. You know, the whole idea is that for our clients that are developers, we would go sit with a major bank, because Derek and I have relationships with the banks with our apartment business. And so that bank would allow that developer in that subdivision to put together a custom program where buyers of those homes could have the upstairs or downstairs rental income count towards qualification before it's even rented out. And so a very unique thing. You and I can't walk into a major bank and ask for that. I've attempted that, and they won't do that. But what we're doing is we realize, and you know this in your industry, that there are other levels of financial institutions that already speak the language of rental income, and they work with buyers and investors, and they understand the challenges with down payments and creativity about accomplishing down payments and those solutions. So we're launching a program that brings about 20 to 25 of these financial institutions to a developer. So when a buyer walks in the door, we can match the right mortgage provider with their circumstances, rather than a one size fits all and assume it works for everyone. And that, because the financing at the end of the day, that's what makes this work from an affordability of ownership perspective. If you don't get that rental income counting towards your mortgage qualification before you've even built or rented that suite, then you're still playing the game of, you know, do I qualify? And now the second part, you said the down payment's still the hurdle. That still is a big hurdle. But part of that, we now have suppliers, we now have companies that will give up to 100% of your down payment for that portion of equity in your home. So imagine my son going to buy his house. Let's say he had zero for a down payment. It's possible, given that he's got all the right qualifications in place, he could borrow his 20% for his down payment, but he would give up 20% equity in his house, meaning that he'd have to buy out that provider a few years down the road, or if he sold it, he would lose. You'd have to pay them out with their 20%. But I'd rather get 80% than give it all to
me. I don't think you don't have to buy them out until you sell, right? The one I know of, I don't think you
don't have to. You have the option to do that.
Yeah, some of those have come and gone. It seems like the one I'm thinking of now, Our Borough is. It seems like they have some funding behind them. We'll see how long it kind of lasts, because I know right now for a while at least they stopped doing it. They put people on a waiting list, so we'll see how long. It's always an interesting model, because remember the Canadian government came out and said they were going to do something similar too, and the uptake on that was
the barriers they had was that CMHC put in there can't be second terms on a mortgage and still qualify for mortgage insurance. So CMHC is going to be tweaking that to allow these types of solutions, because now that Bill 23 has come along, now the new big barrier is exactly what you just said. It is the down payment. Mm-hmm. It is that $100,000, $200,000 that is needed.
The other thing that we were seeing for a while was with newly built garden suites. So not so much with second suites. With garden suites was the appraisals. And they weren't getting the value on the appraisals that they needed to make it a worthwhile investment for people because of the cost to build the garden suite afterwards. That seems to have shifted for the most part. There's that shift where a couple banks came out and they started saying, hey, you know what, we're going to recognize this. And they just basically started treating it as a triplex. And it changed the numbers and the value immediately on those appraisals for the investors, and it changed things. That specifically with the garden suite section, because that was, once that became available more widely, that's where we were seeing some challenges. But now you're starting to see, not entirely, but you're starting to see some investors. It can make financial sense to buy a property, even if they're short term, develop that garden suite and either refinance it or sell it, because you will recapture that expense on the appraisal. It's not widespread yet because there's still kind of, it's a little bit all over the place, but it's like it exists now, whereas not too long ago it just wasn't even it wasn't really a possibility. You'd build it for $200,000 and you'd get $100,000 in the appraisal. It didn't make any sense.
In my opinion, it's a niche solution right now. It's niche because it depends on the land geometry of your land. It depends on where you are, urban, suburban, rural. It's very enticing in a rural, but if there's a market for it, let's say, and definitely as you mentioned, like, the cost of a garden suite is it can almost be a magnitude larger than putting in a basement suite.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But if you're snookered on the basement for other, architectural reasons, it's the option to go with.
Yeah, and we're seeing because some of the builders you're working with are putting these second suites in, and now I saw for the first development that I've seen in the Niagara region where they have an option to put a garden suite in as well from the development side. So we'll see. Who knows? Maybe it'll be popular, maybe not, because it goes back to the same mindset. Some people might be interested in that for the income stream, and some people won't want that in their backyard. And then the other questions are, what's going to happen with parking? Well, how does that look in the neighborhood over a period of time? So there's a lot of unknowns still as we head down this path, right?
Yeah, there are, and that's why one of the things we did, Nick, is we recognize that municipalities are really the gavel in this decision making process. Like, we talk about federal, we talk about provincial, and we talk about municipal, but at the end of the day, this crisis in housing, what we're talking about, really lands on the mayor's desk. That's where the real power is. Yeah, we need the other levels to enable things financially and clear the path for red tape and zoning and all these things, but municipalities. There isn't a municipality, at least that I've spoken to, and I'm speaking to a lot of them on this topic, that doesn't want to attract financial affordability solutions for housing, for both the rent component and ownership component, because municipalities are businesses. They're trying to attract people, they're trying to attract businesses, and those businesses have to have people. And, I live in Burlington, and the cost of living to own a house and rent can make some young talent, unaffordable for their scenario. And so municipalities care about that. The challenge is, they don't have a lot of builders coming to them saying, hey, we have a solution that brings affordability and rents at the same time. And that's what we're making them aware of. Mm-hmm. There is a solution. It's called the self-funding house. And why don't you mandate home builders to build a certain number of these every time they put in 100 houses or a tract? Why not treat it just like CMHC does for apartments, where CMHC says, hey, build 10%, 15, 20% affordable rental units in that apartment building, and we'll give you an incentive. Why can't municipalities say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Home Builder, put in 10 or 15 or 20% affordable homes in your subdivision, and we'll give you an incentive, a tax deferral or whatever. And you should see what the municipalities doing. Their eyes go like this, and all of a sudden, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Because they've never been in the driver's seat to mandate affordability of ownership. They've only ever addressed or talked about either the destitute, like finding the solutions for homeless, and they are in the space of rental now. Mm-hmm. But this is a new territory for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it brings up some interesting questions just about their incentives to do it, because there's so much like I look at the municipalities, and I want to go through some numbers in a second, but just because you brought this up, I look at the municipalities and their hands are strung a little bit, because they just keep increasing these development fees, because they're not in the same position as some other governments, so the federal level, where they can borrow additional funds to basically in some way creating money to offset their budget deficit. So they're always begging for money. So instead they go to whatever kind of they can find without having to try to raise taxes on everyone. They go to the development fees. The development fees, which have spiked, I think the number that I saw, Mike Moffat posted it was about Toronto went up 1,000%, and I want to say somewhere around 10 years. It might have been just
that's
over,
about right. That's about right from my understanding.
Yeah, and I think on a single now, this in Vaughan, you're paying about just over 190,000 in development fees. So they need to balance their budgets. So they're looking at this. So they're not incentivized almost to, like they are for the affordability. They want it, but they need the money because they can't go to external sources and get the money. So they're looking. They've looked at real estate and development fees as a big source of their income. And it's kind of like those two forces work against each other, because we have so much irresponsible spending in every level of government that until you fix that, I feel like that drives a lot of this unaffordability in real estate and other issues where we don't have the infrastructure. We're not spending on the infrastructure because we're wasting it elsewhere. So I just see that and I'm like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And I'm like, man, is it possible for them to do it? Because I just see it as two opposing forces.
It is, as long as it's not one-sided. look at two sides of the coin, and this is where I make sure they understand that this isn't a one-sided ask.
Yeah.
Because if it was just a one-sided ask, hey, cut your DCs in half or whatever, and I can make it happen, that's not the right way to do it. But there is a good way to do it. Now, obviously, CMHC's done its part with the Housing Accelerator Fund. Some municipalities have a chunk of money coming in that allows them to do infrastructure and other things that they were trying to pass on to developers. But the other part of this equation, there's two little pieces here. Number one is every time a self-funding house goes in, there's an increased revenue to the municipality because now you've got two taxable, units.
Residents there.
Yeah. So they often don't work that in. They go, yeah, you're right. Even if that's a small, it's 15%, it's 20% or whatever. Well, that's black ink instead of red ink for them, right? And number two is they're getting their commitment to targets. So the municipalities, the top 19 municipalities have made pledges, we'll call them, to the provincial government for the X number of, homes and rental units going in. This is a 2-for-1 on the same infrastructure. So that rental unit and that home are using the same footprint for, sewers, electrical, road, et cetera. And they're very formulaic municipalities their formulas don't think that way. They think apartment buildings over here of different sizes, and they think single family homes with a few different form factors, towns and singles and duplexes. And it puts a wrinkle in them, but it's a positive wrinkle because when I start talking to the financial people, at the municipalities, they go, you're right, there could be something here. Because if they could give an incentive to a builder where it's DC or deferral, it doesn't have to be a cash back. It can be just, hey, hang on for a couple of years. And then it kicks in. Mm-hmm. So there are ways for them to be in control if they really want to bring affordable solutions to their jurisdictions and have that story to tell their constituents. Because remember, half these people are 4-year cycle people. The other half are
I know that, and that's why. So there's always incentive there for something. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. I'm jaded because as soon as the governments get involved, I'm like, oh man, how are they going to ruin this one? So I take everything with a grain of salt from maybe not the best point of view sometimes, just through experience. I've just seen that go not as well too many times. But you're right. Done right, there's a real possibility there for sure.
Yeah, and I was telling you this before we were on air, is that, I think for the first time in my career, municipalities and developers actually want the same thing. Like we're used to municipalities and builders doing this, negotiating and ego. It's the fight. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, it's very obvious they want more housing units of a certain size and price point. Well, they need it. Like it's very needed.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell them the story. Hey, Mr. Municipality, I'm assuming you want to have more affordable housing. Obvious answer, yes. What if I could say there are developers out there that could do that for you while they still maintain their financial objectives?
Yeah.
Because they're used to negotiating those financial positions as the tension points, right? The builder, who, by the way, new home builders today as we sit here are selling nothing. New home sales have come to a crash, huge crash. And so to talk to a builder, say, how would you like to access the largest buying group in our country? They're all over that. They just don't know who that group is until you tell them it's all the Canadians looking for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. And they can't deliver that building the product they're currently building.
Yeah. So it might actually help with the builders' margins a little bit, because I know a lot of people look at builders and they see what has happened to prices and they just assume the builders are like just raking it in. So maybe their actual net profit numbers have gone up a bit, but it's their margins haven't changed much, or in a lot of cases have actually been squeezed downwards under the current environment from some of the builders that I've been speaking to. So it's not like people think that, the price of these homes have gone up. So now that the builder's been pocketing all that, but that's not been the case at all. So something like this could actually help them because they're creating a good chunk of additional value by creating that secondary suite. And because it's being done from new construction, like you were talking about earlier, there's not the same expenses. So it could actually, there is a world where it actually can work for everyone. Like you're painting, it can work for the government side, it can work for the builder side, and it can work for the end user or the buyer side of the property. If everything can get aligned, there is that possibility.
Yeah, and what we've seen even with the developments in the 5 different cities where we have builders building these homes, right now as we sit, the lion's share, like 40% of these are going to investors.
Okay, that's that. Okay,
right? And 60% are coming from people who are already pre-approved. So these aren't people that have lost the dream, can't afford it. These are people that can afford it. They've been pre-approved. What we haven't even scratched the surface of yet, Nick, is all the Canadians have said, I'm not even in the market. I'm not even looking for a house because I know I can't afford it. They have to be made aware of it. And we're not yet in front of those people. And when builders and us figure out how to get that message to them, builders will be back into providing a product that's in demand and is filling the void of affordability.
Mm-hmm. So so on that note, let's look at an example here from the book. Here's an owner occupies main floor, basement unit rented, the purchase price of $750. Of course, we talked about the down payment, so it's still a bunch of the down payment. Oh, this is the basement ADU.
Yeah, so what that's assuming is a 20% down payment, just for the simplicity of mortgage insurance. But we've got all the simple online tools that.
Okay, you have the renovation budget in here. Yep. So basically, what it's changing the required household income by. I actually don't see that here.
So in our models in the book, and we use when we speak out loud, that $750 house price is that average price in Canada. So we have to talk about the country rather than a specific market. But we provide the specific markets when we're talking in London or Milton.
Sure, you get a rough idea though. Yeah.
But we know all those metrics. We have a complete research department on staff, so we can do all that. But the modeling in there is centered around that average house price, 20% down. And not in a downtown Toronto or Burlington market, but let's go outside into a secondary market like London, Ontario, where that downstairs basement will rent for $1,500, or the upstairs, if you live downstairs, will rent for about $2,800. And those are the exact numbers that fuel that example I gave of needing a $200,000 income, rent downstairs. Now all of a sudden that $200,000 becomes about $120,000. Live downstairs and rent out upstairs. The household income becomes now about $60,000.
Got it. I see it here now. So if you're living upstairs, renting downstairs, based on this example in the book, the required household income is $117,500, which is a lot different than if you're looking for a $750,000 purchase. Now on that income, you would require much more household income.
Yeah, approaching $200,000.
Yeah. It becomes really interesting. Let me ask you something else. This is a selfish question now. Where do you think this go? Like, where are we in this cycle of this affordability? Like, where do we go from here to try to? So this is one solution, right? But is this the only solution? Like, what else are we looking at to kind of move forward as a country, as a society? Like, we're running a risk now that if we're not giving our youth opportunity, and we're in, this is my opinion, we're not giving our youth opportunity and we're putting them in a situation where the asset ownership is getting more and more out of reach, we run a risk that our society slowly starts deteriorating because we need the youth and the innovation they bring and everything, and we need to attract people and investment and all that to be able to continue down the path that we were going down. So this to me isn't just like a housing issue. This is like a longer term issue of if you just look at the GTA for an example from the affordability standpoint, it's a long term issue that the GTA has that they need to fix to stay competitive globally, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, and it's multivariate. So what you've hinged on is that it isn't like the self-funding house doesn't work in downtown Toronto. It's a suburban where tract housing gets built, new construction. But we have to deal with urban.
But can it work with downtown housing, but just with laneway housing?
It can, and that's why it's multivariate, because there's infill scenarios. There is, and that's really why the housing crisis at the core has two major components: the affordability of ownership and the affordability of rents. And because affordability of ownership doesn't exist, so many Canadians have now gone where? To rent. And now we're in an immigration-centric society, and our country's not going to be changing that. We're still going to be, we have to for our economy. There's so much pressure on the rental side of the equation, which most home buyers don't even understand that impacts the price of their home. Those rental units, until the government makes pro formas work again for rental, mid-rises, high-rises, et cetera, and we can get the costs under control from rent, because most renters are paying more than a mortgage payment. If you look at it, when the average rent's like $3,500, $4,000 in some places, that's more than a mortgage payment.
Yeah. You're probably right, because based on the number of renewals that have come up so far, even at higher rates, you're probably right, whereas most renters are still paying more than a mortgage payment. Because there's been some now that aren't, especially in the Toronto condo market, if someone's closed over the last 12 or 24 months, maybe that's not the case because they've closed at a higher mortgage rate. Rents are down a little bit from where they were. So that might not be the case. But you're right. Like most people are really, but there's still those barriers of qualification.
There's a big number of them, whatever that number is, that probably don't realize that there are solutions. Like their cash flow supports a mortgage. What they've just cut off with is the down payment question, right? They don't have that $200K for that $1 million house or what have you. And that's where solutions like this come into play, where if income can be part of the strategy of ownership, and there are other financial solutions that can help with down payment and, giving up some equity and things like that, that's how a number of renters that are looking to be in ownership, but let's face it, people are in the core of the downtown Vancouver or Toronto, they may not want a home. They're in a city lifestyle. Well, that's a different bucket. Mm-hmm. The bucket I'm speaking to are the people who probably at one time had the dream of home ownership, but they've lost it and aren't even thinking about it anymore.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, but isn't this also, can this not be also looked at as just a Band-Aid solution? Because isn't the problem, unless incomes are going up in relation in a better ratio than they have historically compared to asset prices, then even this approach ends up stopping. It's got a limited life cycle as well.
Well, yeah, it does. And because that bump of income, that lower basement rent or the upstairs rent is a raise at your job, so to speak, as far as the financial institution.
But it's no different than when we started talking, you talked about, when you bought a home, it was 2 times or whatever, 3 times your income. And then when your son went to buy a home recently, it was, in the teens.
Yeah.
But if even if with this bump in income, if the teens turns to the low 20s, we're in the same situation all over again.
Well, and that's where the expansion of this comes into place. So we've got some of our clients now that have different form factors. So out in Port Colborne, where they're building duplexes, and those duplexes, so an attached home duplex with basement suites. So the price point now of a duplex is less than a single family. It goes one step further. Towns. We've got a client out west in Edmonton that's building 4 towns in a row. The 2 end units have side entrances, 2 basement units. Now there's 6 units in that block, which is an investable product now because there's 5 or more units. And so you start then taking the same principle and apply it to different form factors of homes.
But why do we live in a situation now where to have home ownership, someone needs to then decide whether they want 2 units or 4 units, and that's the way they're able to have home ownership. I think that's where I'm getting at. Why are we at this point? Because we're not solving we're solving a problem. We're not solving the root cause of the problem. This is a Band-Aid solution to a problem that was caused, but we're not solving the root of the problem. So I don't disagree with the self-funding house. It makes sense, but things are screwed. Well, why can't someone go buy if I come out of school as an engineer and I work my ass off for 5 years, engineer, good job, call it 10 years, or almost 10 years, so I'm 30 years old. I have some money saved up. I have what would be considered a good job. I can't live in the city of Toronto in a home because my salary is unlikely to support that. So then I have to go to the self-funding house approach, which is great. It's a great approach. I can get laneway housing or self-funding house, or I can move further to the city. But doesn't something seem screwy with that?
It does, but like Benjamin Tull said, what other options have you got? But here's what I'll submit to you, Nick, is that it's one of context, meaning that it's cultural and it's market driven. Mm-hmm. When you look at the marketplaces in Canada that have the lowest rents, what would you guess the major city lowest rents in our country?
Majors. We only have a handful of major cities.
They have to have an NHL team. We'll use that as a qualifier.
Yeah, okay. So then I'd probably go, because of the cost of housing relatively recently, I'd go into Alberta. So I'd go Edmonton if I had to guess. Good
financial answer, but I led with the cultural. The answer is Montreal. Here's why.
That's right, because so many people rent.
It's cultural. It's generational. It's normal to grow up in a house with a basement suite. It's normal to live in the basement while you're a child and grow up in a duplex, a triplex. And it's been generational. And that's why they have the lowest rents, because it's accepted. It's part of society. It's that European kind of culture in the denser
Yeah, July 1st. I've seen videos on July 1st in Montreal. It's just crazy because people are just moving. Everyone, it's like turnover day.
Those rents are half of what they are in Vancouver and Toronto.
Are they really?
One half. And the same thing with Quebec City. So those two cities. So this is why I got to the context.
We need an NHL team. To back to your question, we need an NHL team back in Quebec City. That's very important.
Yeah, the Nordique got to come back.
That's very important. Sorry, back to the...
I'm tracking with you because it's almost NHL season now. But that's part of the equation. Home builders have only ever had to build a product, put up a sales center, and the people line up to buy them, and they just become builders and order takers. But we're in a place now, because I want to address your question about we're not fixing the problem. The problem is we can't afford houses. The fix isn't in the cheaper house, or it's in the mindset, because we have to make rental duplexes, this whole culture that you and I know in the investment space of real estate is normal for wealth creation, but it's not part of our culture. I grew up in a culture in Burlington, Ontario, where it's single family homes, and that was what was indelibly ingrained because I didn't know any different. But take me who grew up in Montreal. No, it's normal to have that duplex, triplex. Because that's so normal now, that young guy, that young gal who graduates, that engineer story you just had, that solution inside Montreal is different than somebody living in Milton or Oakville.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. But then in Toronto, if rents can't support prices now, we're not able to, because then I'm like, okay, if we need to get to affordable rents, because I think we can kind of agree probably that rents right now are approaching pretty much an unaffordable state, even for rent for a lot of people.
Agreed.
So to fix that, we need same thing. We need either more income to start happening, or we need more sustainable price levels, because if price levels are more sustainable, then people will add supply to the market. But if rents get cut in half, like if they were, I don't know where the Montreal rents
it is a supply and demand issue, like right now with rents.
But we can't put new supply in at the price that we are with where rents where they are. Like we can't add new supply. So you're talking government incentive then?
I'm just talking about pro formas working. Like right now, you're coming off of 24 months of the majority, especially in urban markets. Pro formas just won't work out
for new construction, like multi-unit new construction.
Yeah. And that's why now we're just starting to see that little cresting and downward movement of interest rates, and now a little hint of maybe bigger moves and all of that, until pro formas are back to where the yields make sense for developers to get back to building. Right now, to build a building in some markets for a 2.5% return when GICs are 5%, it makes zero sense from a risk perspective. Yeah. And I think that's the end. And again, that's not the answer to our problem. It's multivariate, but rent is part of it. Ownership is a big part of it. Different form factor, getting construction going. There's all these different pieces of the puzzle that are the answer to this problem of this so-called crisis that we're in. There is no one. The self-funding house isn't the answer. Mm-hmm. It's an answer for suburban, new construction, tract housing, and the municipalities that live in that space to bring affordability of ownership and rents. And that's not 100% of our problem. Is it 20%? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. What percentage of housing prices do you think has just been the financialization of real estate?
From what perspective?
If you had to guess.
From ownership or investment?
From investment. From people just being like, hey, if I leave my money in the bank, I'm getting ripped off through inflation, but I'm just going to buy these assets because these assets seem to attract a certain percentage of the new capital that's being formed, the new M2 money supply. So I'm going to park my money in this and hold on to it for a little bit because the prices have gone up.
Yeah, I think that you live in the world of investment.
Sure, yeah.
Meaning that audience gets the math and understands that approach. The challenge is that the vast majority of Canadians don't think that way.
Yeah.
They're not in that space. They're hanging on to them. They don't even play in the stock market. They might dabble in the stock market, but they are your average middle class that would love to own a house or do own a house. They're not thinking about buying a second house.
So you think it's pretty small?
I think it's limited to those that get the numbers. Yeah. I think that's my point.
I don't know. I ask people that are in, because I'm just curious everyone's opinion, because I don't actually know. I don't really even have an opinion. I'm like, if I had to guess, I'm like, I don't know, maybe is there a 20% premium on house prices because of the state that we've been in over the last, probably really since about the year 2000, when they really kind of pushed interest rates really low and started flooding, not flooding, but I mean, they've been flooding the money with the markets with money now, but they started an increased speed of money creation at that time. And that's why I just don't know. Like, I'm just curious.
And that's why we've been, as Derek and I build out this self-funding house concept through this company, is we realize there's a front stage and a backstage. The backstage are all the stakeholders, the builders, the financiers. You and I there's all the people that get the numbers and all
Sure,
that.
yeah.
But it's that front stage awareness. Does the average Canadian realize that there are solutions out there? Does the average Canadian understand how important it is to get money in the real estate business? Their own house, their own equitable, appreciating asset. Most have just excused themselves from that thinking the barrier, the hurdle is just too tall, too big, and aren't even thinking about that. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to rekindle. We have to rekindle that wealth mentality from not settling for, but going in the direction of possibilities.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to penetrate in terms of the mindset. And if I had the answer, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. It's a good point. There was a report. I mean, there's been many reports, but the one that comes to mind was probably 1 or 2 years ago now. But TD did a report, and it compared homeowners versus renters and their net worth at different stages over time. And the homeowners finished far ahead. They finished
Absolutely.
far ahead, and early on, not so much, but when you talk about if you're able to get into one of these homes using this approach at an earlier age and you're able to sit on that asset for 10, 20, 30 years, it makes a big difference. And in retirement, it gives you some options and things like that. So there's a wealth gap that exists between, and this report specifically was about homeowners. I expand that to asset owners, to people who own assets versus the people that don't. And if this is a way to be able to get people to think about that, it's worthwhile. I'd imagine you probably get pushback, maybe not you directly, but some builders or something are probably, one of the arguments is like, I don't want someone else living in my house, or those types of things. And I guess that's just, to your point, that's probably just a mindset shift you're thinking.
It is, because it's an uphill battle. You've got Canadians that are, fed in the media of all the horror stories of landlord tenancy. You only ever hear about the bad stories. But we've already got the answers to a lot of those challenges that are perceived challenges, because they're not if you actually do it right. Just like, if you think about the benefits, it's easy for you and I here today to talk about the benefits of this kind of a concept. We're teaching someone how to own a business. That's a good skill set to have. We're teaching someone to understand money beyond their T4 slip. That's a good skill to have. We're teaching people to understand other people. When you're looking for a renter, you're dealing, those are good skills that, regardless of whether they intended to learn those, these become other benefits to this whole concept that just multiply the opportunity for these home buyers. Because otherwise, compared to let's say we weren't in these times of exorbitant house prices and all that, and people are just continuing on, trudging along, buying a house, and it doubles, it triples in value over their lifetime, and just normal times from decades past. They aren't necessarily learning much. They're just doing what mom and dad did because that's what they were supposed to do. Yeah. Maybe, just maybe, this is going to be a time where, when we do shift the mindset, we actually create a stronger Canadian. We create a stronger and well-educated and better suited for business and success Canadian, an individual. I think there's a lot of fringe benefits that weren't intended, but become results as a result of it.
That's interesting, because I would agree with that. One of the recent properties that I got, I've taken my kids, I guess when we get this last year, so at that time they'd be 10 and 13. And through the process, just getting it up and running, I had to do some little things with the property and then showing it. And, we dragged them there. I wanted them to be involved in all of it and see it and things like that. And I've been partially successful at that. I wish I'd been more. I wish I could say that I've been way more successful at doing that, but I've been partially successful. And I don't really care if they ever invest in real estate, but I just want them to understand that there's different avenues you can take. And you can invest in real estate if you want. And if it's never spoken about in school from a financial sense, I just want them to understand that it's not just this one path, because I feel like we're still primarily, our systems in society are still structured towards one path.
To have a job.
Go to school, go to high school. After you're done high school, well, you got to go to university or college. Or I still think university is considered at a higher level than college, even though in a lot of instances, college is the better option. But I still think it's you go to university and that gets you this good job. And that's the way it works. We still even run, I feel like still in our society, and it's gotten better. but we don't respect even trades the way we should respect them.
I agree with you. I think there's a lot of university degrees that are almost commoditized now.
Oh, they're useless, some of them.
Because they're a dime a dozen, as opposed to, an entrepreneurial electrician degree.
My God, yeah.
Could be a multiple six figures in 3, 4, 5 years with an entrepreneurial mindset. Because I think what you're getting at is that path of get a good education, get a good job, everything works out in life. That formula no longer works.
I think it's long gone.
Yeah.
Especially, and there's people coming out with good education that their jobs just aren't available. Or the wages those jobs are paying, it's not giving them the options that they were hoping for at all. So yeah, it makes it more challenging. Yeah, the trades one has always bugged me because it's always, sometimes I feel it's getting better. But it was like, oh, well, you can't make it into university. Like maybe you just learn a trade, and I'm like, what are you talking about? We need these people in life. You know what I mean?
The interesting thing is when I talk to my son or I talk to either one of my sons or my daughter, and you talk about the trades and electrician, they go, they don't have the same mindset you and I have. They know friends. They know, like they
get it now.
They get it. They say like, no way. I mean, these guys are making $300,000 and they're like 4 years out of trade school, and they're working hard, but you know what? It's not, they're not begrudging the manual labor. It's no longer thought of that. They get the drill.
I've always been someone that I've been happy to be rewarded for my work. Whereas when I started working, my first job was at the municipality of Peel. Mm-hmm. And I came out and it was in IT. And so I had a decent salary. Coming to school, I actually had a good salary. I was recruited out of school. I actually did a co-op term with them. I turned down another job that I was recruited for, went to the region of Peel, good salary. But I got very frustrated very quickly because I couldn't be rewarded for my work. There was a very strict structure in place for if there was 8 people on the team, 1 person could get the max raise, 2 other people could get cost of living, 3 people had to get this amount. Like it was just, that's how
formulaic.
How it worked. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like it was just, I got frustrated very quickly, and that's why I took off into other things. But to your point about the university degrees, and I'm sure you've probably seen some of the things too, because when we get resumes, when we're hiring in here, some of the university degrees are just, they shouldn't even be allowed to. I don't know how much they charge for them. If it's the same price as all the other degrees, they shouldn't even be allowed to charge for these things, because I just don't see how it applies into almost every other field. There's just these random things that they're offering now. It just seems, it really does seem like a cash grab at this point.
Yeah, and it is a business. It definitely is a business. I mean, I'm an engineer and did that, but that white collared, bucket that I was in, it was short lived for me. I spent a little less than 10 years in that space, maxed out my income, and realized that it was the entrepreneurial space. And so the last 30 years have been all entrepreneur, and it's that mindset. Because Derek's the same way. He's an entrepreneur. He's schooled in college and so forth as well.
He's not an engineer though.
No. He was at metallurgy was actually his background.
Because I was going to say from an engineer to go entrepreneurial, I feel like I see less of that than I do other people. Because usually engineers are so structured, and sometimes entrepreneurial is all over the place. But I guess if you can harness the structure with the ability to kind of like I don't even know if it's risk taking, but like with the ability to go outside of that structure when you need to and implement things, it's actually a really good combination when you put them together.
Yeah, and then that's why my whole career has been about being the best number 2, because every strong entrepreneur needs an implementer, needs someone to implement their dreams so they can stay in their outer space, creativity and whatever. It's when that high performing entrepreneur tries to do the math and hold the hammer or something like that, they're doing something they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, Tom and I joke because Tom will be like, I don't know, Nick, I think we should do this. I'm like, well, why? He's like, well, it just feels like I should do this. I'm like, okay, well, Tom, here's all the numbers. Like I've looked at it. So like, let's take a look at the numbers. We can use that to decide too. He's like, yeah, okay. Yeah. I looked at them, and like, he has looked at them, but for like half a second. I'm like, but you haven't actually looked at them. You can't just, we have to at least respect them to some degree. I'm not like a hardcore engineer type person, but I need some raw data. Whereas he runs on like a lot of just like he's more just the entrepreneurial, just like, and it just feels right. I'm going to do it. I'm just like, oh.
There's a place for all of it. Like Michael Gerber, when he wrote his book, The E-Myth, The Entrepreneurial Myth, he said that there's 3 elements for a successful entrepreneurial endeavor. You need the entrepreneur, the dreamer, but you need a technician, somebody who's got the technical, and you need the manager. And often the entrepreneur is forced into all 3 roles, But their ceiling of complexity is when they are one person trying to do all three.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, it is.
That's a problem. Every successful entrepreneur I know is very well aware of the things they can't do. They don't pretend. Sometimes they want to be involved in more than they should be, but they're also very well aware of certain weaknesses. They're like, I absolutely suck at that, and there's no way I should be doing that.
Or they don't want to either. Like they're passionate about something.
Yeah.
Other things they loathe, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you're passionate, I guess, about books, right? Seems like you've gone through, like, there's this one. So what's the other book that's coming out?
So we wrote the second book, which is the blueprint for your self-funding house.
Oh, that's out already.
That's out already. And so that one, we worked with a gentleman, Ken Beekendam.
Yeah, I know Ken.
You know Ken. And because we wanted to partner with someone in the content of that book to serve the readers who are going to buy a house and then renovate, because Derek and I could not provide that expertise. So Ken's done hundreds of these, right? So that's what we did there. And then in there we talk about new construction as well. And then the third book's going to be all the stakeholders, bringing together the governments, municipalities, financial. Now we're already doing that, but
that's going to be an interesting
and that's going to be a backstage message rather than it's not for the home buyer. The first two are for the home buyer, but this one is going to be for all those that we think really need to support this endeavor and add fuel to the fire rather than water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny with those types of stakeholders, especially at the government, the more formal ones there, you really need some sort of literature for them to go through. It almost makes the idea real versus just a conversation. I feel like it's either a book or almost like a couple different white papers for that. You guys you're the research guys, because the governments would love, did you see this white paper on the self-funding house? That's the type of the way they make their decisions in their meetings. From my past experience, I don't know how it's done anymore.
And that's why we're focused on municipalities, because that's where the rubber meets the road with the builders and the buyer. Like, they're the one common element. We just think the other two levels are enablers, and it's important that they be lobbied. And we need new landlord tenancy laws. You can't have the same laws that govern a 500 unit building, governing the person living in your basement. That's just not going to fly in today's world. We need different sets. So there's things like that those upper levels of government need to address.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's a really big point, because I meant to bring that up earlier when we were talking about other things, because I agree with you there, because it just doesn't work the same way at all, right?
No, not at all. When someone's in your basement, you need to have much shorter timelines for ultimatums or reclaiming that space, because at the end of the day, it is your house. These squatter rights don't apply to my basement. It's kind of when we think about it. And the reality in our minds, for Derek and I, when we spend our time, we just realize that we're not going to sit back and wait for this entity, this government, this body to do this or do that. We just decided we're going to do it ourselves. Whether we do it right or not, we're just going to do, because too much is being talked about, and we ought to do this and this statistic, and look at these affordability stats and all this. That's not helping anybody. So that's why we just said, let's just go ahead and start building these. Let's start tackling the municipalities. Let's start tackling the finances. Let's start tackling property management. Let's start bringing investor groups to the buyers and bring pipelines of buyers to the people that are building these products. We want to get all cylinders in the engine, at least in motion. Yeah,
I think it's the only way you're going to get anything done these days. If you just wait for every T to be crossed and I to be dotted, it's just nothing's going to happen.
Yeah,
nothing's going to happen. I mean, isn't the city of Hamilton, their computer system still down for property taxes from the beginning of this year? They had some cyber attack. They still haven't got them up and running.
And then I was reading on the weekend, Edmonton now has instant building permits. You go online and you do your building permit online, and you can start building tomorrow. Like,
really?
There's the other night and day side of a municipality who has their stuff together for developers. And you should read it, because they are the model municipality of efficiency, building, red carpet, like putting the red carpet out for builders. And guess what? You mentioned Alberta, because Edmonton is actually the most economical housing market in our country of a big city. But they're going to go through the same thing. They're going to go through their ebb and flow of increased.
That's normal. That's everywhere. Yeah. Everything overshoots. It overshoots and undershoots. It's just the way things go. Yeah. But that's just normal. I think it's just, if it's done in a normal way and there's not too much manipulation where people step in, those are normal cycles that everyone can survive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's a success for you? If you're looking back at this in 5-10 years, what's happening with this concept that feels like it's been successful for you over that time period?
that municipalities and builders are happy because subdivisions are going in where there's a blend of solutions, different form factors. Some have self-funding houses, some of them don't. And it becomes as normal. When I built my house 20 years ago and they roughed in, a basement bathroom, that at worst case, these builders are roughing in basement apartments, the entrance, the kitchen, and it's roughed in at least because, that would just be, we'd be more conscious of the things that are barriers today so that in the future they don't have those. We can do a lot of things right now to make this happen. And I think that the ultimate, to answer your question, I think I've now formulated as I talked, is when a larger swath of young Canadians actually genuinely believe their dream of home ownership can be real for them once again. When that mindset's there, those vehicles will appear, whether the self-funding house and other things we haven't even thought of yet. When that happens, I feel like we've had a success. I feel like we've challenged, solved the challenge. Because that's what Derek and I are after. We're trying to be problem solvers. And we love to be known as, the people that took this on and had some level of success and cracked the code to make it happen.
That's very cool. That's really cool. That's like a good purpose or a goal to be chasing, because the amount of impact that has, I feel like, is far beyond home ownership for people. There's second order effects there that ripple out into multiple different areas.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool. Where do people find, like, what's the point? Like, not what's the point? What's the place that they find more information? Is it just grab the book online someplace?
Super simple. So regardless of who they are, whether they're a home buyer, whether they're a builder, whether they're, a property management firm or an investor or just want to have interest, they can all go to the same spot, which is theselffundinghouse.com. And we serve all those information nuggets there, regardless of who you are. You're a builder. I want to learn about these to build the product. I'm a municipality. I want to learn about how this does tackle rental prices and affordability. Or if you're just a young Canadian who wants to get a hold of the book, you go there. You can find the book there as well. It's on Amazon.
That's cool.
So it's super simple in terms of how to access it and to get direct access to all the information.
And if you're listening to this and you're in a municipality somewhere, get on it, man. We need you guys to kind of speed this process up. Let's get this goal met sooner rather than later. So, but Rod, I appreciate you coming, man. This is this was really cool. I really respect what you guys are after. I think it's cool if we can get more people thinking a little bit different financially, asset ownership, and move forward. I think it leaves an impact and it helps. So cool. Appreciate what you're doing, man.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.